Hey YouTube, thanks for checking out RV Daydream. It's a beautiful day in Ohio, but it is cold. We're only at about 44. You guys down in the south, good for you. We like watching when it's warm, and we're going to give you a nice cold update at some point, let you even feel better being down in that warmth. But today I'm working on the truck. Let's go see what's going on there.
What have you been up to?
I've been riding on a daydream. I want to talk about leaks and stuff like that. You can see this is stop leak stuff here. I've used this stuff for years. I don't care to. The best way to fix a leak is to find the source of the leak and repair it. But you might get into a bind, especially an RVer, might be out on a road, might be on the highway towing, and you need to get somewhere to really look at things. And believe it or not, this stuff can really seal off some things. Unfortunately, this stuff can really seal off some things, and that's including the heater core. Now, when I got this truck, I don't know if you guys remember this, new subscribers probably not so much. I've done a ton of stuff to this new water pump, different alternator, different coolant neck for the gauges. It's got a fitting for it, a cooler thermostat, a 4-core radiator, and a new heater core. I mean, just fuel injectors, ignition boxes, exhaust, all kinds of stuff. But in this case, when I first got the truck, talking about the cooling system, I noticed that the radiator was a little bit blocked. It was only a 2-core radiator, and it just didn't cool the way that I thought it should. The other thing is I needed to go to a cooler thermostat because I didn't like the temperatures that it was operating at. And the third thing was I noticed that my heater core made some weird noises in the morning. It sounded like a straw, somebody blowing something through a straw, and that's essentially what it was. You know, a radiator and a heater core is nothing but a bunch of straws that are stacked up, and everything's trying to get from one side to the other through all those straws, and that's how you get rid of heat or get cool air, to cool things off, is it travels through that straw and air blows across it. Well, whenever I got the truck, I noticed that the guy put stop leak in, and that's because he dorked around and cracked a filler neck, and he didn't even know it, and he was trying to repair a leak, and I don't know. I just don't understand what some people are thinking, but that's definitely not something that I would use stop leak for, not something that simple and easy. So whenever I put in my new neck there, is when I noticed that stuff just wasn't flowing the way it should. So at that point, that's when I removed the old water pump, removed the old radiator, and I flushed the block out. And when I flushed the block, I found a lot of stop leak, and I knew that was going to be an issue. So I filled everything with water when I got my new radiator and my new water pump, and I ran everything really well, and then I flushed all the water out, and then I refilled it with water, and I drove like that during the summer for probably about a month. And I still noticed that I was still getting some residue of stop leak. I mean, this stuff is like the plague, but again, it does the job. I noticed that there was a small leak, believe it or not, right out of the box, and I didn't even know it for probably the first 2 months of having it. So I had Heidi get me another new 4-core radiator, and when I installed it, I noticed a lot of stop leaks still floating around. Even though I did a block flush and everything when I had the water pump off, I just couldn't get that, the corners where this stuff goes. I mean, it just finds little places to get trapped in. That's its whole purpose in life, is to find a space to block off. So I did what I could, and it still seemed to be floating through the system, but I couldn't afford to go anymore, and we were getting ready to go on our trip to Florida, and I didn't want to drive 3,000 miles with water in the system, especially when we were going in the summer to Florida. I knew I needed to have something that worked pretty well and have the correct amount of coolant in there, because coolant helps with lubrication and keeping the boiling point down. What I did was filled it up with antifreeze, the correct 50-50 mix, and we went on our trip. We came back, everything was fine. The vehicle didn't overheat or anything, but I noticed that it seemed like coolant would always go into the overflow, but it would never go back into the radiator. And the way the system works is you have coolant that is topped off, and whenever that stuff gets really hot, it expands. Well, when you have this much liquid that's running all through this engine, through the cooling system, expand, it needs a place to go. If not, it will break parts. So what they did is they put a bypass on your radiator cap that at a certain pressure will allow your coolant to leave and go into a recovery tank, and will fill the recovery tank. Like, this is my full whenever it's cold, but when it's hot, it's about up to here. So I mean, there is a difference between here and here, not very much, but about a cup. So that's what it wasn't doing. So what was happening, it was all going into here and just staying full, but the radiator was always low. So I'd put more in the radiator, and then it would go in here and it would overflow, but the radiator was low. And that's because the way these radiator caps work. Now this one's at a 13 pounds, so whenever the system gets warm and it expands, and once it gets to 13 pounds, the cap opens, and when it opens, it allows coolant to go from the radiator down through the tube, and it fills from the bottom this overflow tank. Now, what happens then after the system cools down is the radiator is low, and it creates a vacuum, and that vacuum pulls this vacuum valve open. That's what this part is on the radiator cap. And when it does that, it allows the vacuum to suck through this tube, you guessed it, the coolant back out of the overflow tank and into the radiator, so it keeps it full. That's why you can just fill and check your radiator coolant from this, as long as it's working correctly. So you can see after that trip that we took, 3,000 miles, and then probably a couple weeks after that, this thing sitting, it built up this clay, and it was blocking everything off. So the other day I noticed that my coolant tank wasn't working so well, so I went ahead and got a new cap. So that's what you got to be aware of with stop leak. The stuff works, it will get you by. Just use what you need, and once the leak stops, flush it all out. And bypass your heater core. Just get another piece of hose that's the same size as these hoses, disconnect both of them. There's going to be coolant that comes out. You got to do this when the vehicle's cool, obviously. And then you're going to want to run a hose that just loops from one to the other, and of course clamped. That way whatever comes out of the block goes right back in. You don't want that stuff to go into your heater core, or you're going to be replacing your heater core. And be aware, your radiator cap may look like this. The other thing I would do is pull your overflow tube off of your filler neck and just leave it hang. Whatever comes out, comes out. You don't want that to get clogged up, because I had to clean this out too. So just be aware, this stuff is out there, it works, but do you really want to use it? It's best to find the leak before you do all this crap and deal with all the stuff that I've been dealing with. That's it, guys. It's not going to be a very long video, just a lengthy verbal one. We're going to do some more videos coming up here. I've got some other things I want to talk about, and we'll see that in the near future. As always, guys, I hope to see you out there. Bye.